If you're an investor and you're born after 1970, you will have no point of reference for the pandemic that we're experiencing today in your lifetime. So some investors may be feeling at a loss. We can go back roughly a little over 100 years, and there are 3 pandemics that we can look at and that you might have heard referenced in the news. Number 1, the question is, are they useful as comparison today? And 2, what are the lessons that we can take from those as an investor, and how can you apply those lessons in your portfolio? I'm Anna Hilberry. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. So for illustrative purposes only, I'm going to look at 3 examples. The first one, which you've probably heard mentioned in the news, is the outbreak of H1N1 in 1918, otherwise known as the Spanish flu. And they're comparing that event to today's outbreak of Covid-19. And the truth of the matter is the 2 events are completely incomparable. Here's why. The Earth's population in 1918 was about 1.8 billion people. Of that, 500 million people, or roughly 28% of the Earth's population, became ill. That's a huge number. And of that number, about 50 million people perished. 675,000 alone in the United States. So it had a huge economic impact on the planet. If we compare that to today's event, today's pandemic, about 1.8 million people have contracted the illness of about 8 billion people on the planet. So that's less than 1% of the Earth's population. So 30% infection rate in 1918 versus less than 1% today so far. The lesson that we can get from that is social distancing was working and self-isolation is working, and we should absolutely continue to follow medical professional advice. But if we're looking at it from an investment standpoint and comparing the 2 events, they're completely incomparable so far. And so I'm not even going to bother looking at what happened to the stock market then versus now, because the events are completely different. Let's move on to the next example. Now, the next example that I want to look at is the pandemic of 1957 and 1958. It was otherwise known as the Asian flu. The first recorded result, according to the CDC, was in Singapore in February in 1957. By April, it had hit US shores. The total death toll worldwide was about 1.1 million people, and about 116,000 people perished in the United States. If we extrapolate that forward to today's population numbers in the United States, where the population in the US today is roughly double that in 1957, that would be comparable of about 234,000 people dying today in the United States. The peak to trough total decline of the Dow was about 6%, and within about a year and a half from the first case appearing, the Dow had fully recovered. The lesson here is that even in extreme example where you have a lot of people perishing, a lot of people falling ill for a virus, the economy does recover, and prices in the stock market, the prices of companies, will return to a more reasonable price level in about a year and a half. Let's look at another example. The flu pandemic of 1968 originally occurred, according to the CDC, in China in July. By September of 1968, the first case was recorded in the United States, and it took a little bit longer to play out because it happened in 2 waves. Now, the Dow also took a little bit longer to recover. So if you take September from the starting point in 1968, it took all the way to March of 1971. So about 2.5 years for peak to trough to recovery, for the Dow to fully recover. The total decline was about 22.6%. And the reason that I think that the decline was probably larger is perhaps because there was a greater time frame which this was taking place over, and it maybe gave investors a larger time frame for which they could react. Now, some investors have asked, why have the reactions today in the stock market been so much more so than in 1958 and 1968? And I think the answer is because of technology. The S&P 500 and the TSX at one point were down well over 30%. And if you think about it, before, historically, there was no such thing as a cell phone. You had to actually pick up the phone and you had to deal with an investment advisor or a stockbroker. Whereas now, you don't have to deal with anyone. You don't have to phone anyone. You can just pick up your phone. You could be out walking the dog and you press sell. I'm feeling freaked out. I'm going to sell my portfolio. And so what that means is it gives the patient investor opportunity to react to people who have oversold their portfolio and reacted from an emotional standpoint. So there's actually more opportunity today, I believe, than there was in the past. So for the patient investor, if you have a little bit of extra money you got some time, and you do some buying in here, and you can get paid to wait by buying dividend-paying stocks, focusing on quality, and maybe you get some interest payments in there, the patient investor is likely to be well rewarded over time. You're probably going to be just fine. I hope this has been helpful for you. I'm Anna Hilberry. Thank you for listening.